In the autumn of 52 BC, the struggle for Gaul reached a decisive moment at Alesia. The hilltop settlement stood above the surrounding valleys, protected by steep slopes, rivers, and strong defenses. Inside was Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader who had brought many tribes together against Rome. Outside waited Julius Caesar and his veteran legions. Both sides understood that the outcome could shape the future of Gaul. Vercingetorix had withdrawn into Alesia with thousands of warriors, horses, supplies, and civilians. The position offered protection, but it also carried a serious risk. Once the Romans closed the roads and valleys, the defenders could be cut off from food and reinforcements. Caesar chose not to launch a direct assault against the heights. Instead, he ordered his soldiers to surround the settlement. Trenches were dug across the open ground. Earthworks rose along the slopes. Watchtowers were placed at key points, and the main routes leading in and out of Alesia were sealed. The Roman plan was simple in theory: isolate the defenders and wait. But before the blockade was complete, Gallic cavalry managed to escape. They carried an urgent message to the tribes beyond Alesia, calling for a large relief force to gather and march toward the trapped army. Days later, movement appeared on the distant hills. A Gallic relief army had arrived outside Caesar's siege lines. From the walls of Alesia, the defenders could see that help had come. The situation changed. What had begun as a Roman siege was becoming a contest of endurance fought across a ring of earth and timber. The Romans were no longer surrounding only one enemy. They were now positioned between two Gallic forces. Vercingetorix could attack from inside the settlement. The relief army could strike from outside. Caesar's soldiers were spread across a long line of defenses, far from Rome and deep in unfamiliar territory. If one section of the line failed, the two Gallic armies could connect and force the Romans to abandon the siege. A more cautious commander might have ordered a retreat. Caesar gave a different command. He told the legionaries to build a second line of fortifications, this one facing outward. The inner defenses would contain the army inside Alesia. The outer defenses would protect the Romans from the relief force approaching from beyond the valleys. The besieging army had turned its own position into a fortress between two opponents. From that moment, victory would depend on more than battlefield courage. It would depend on discipline, organization, engineering, and the ability of ordinary soldiers to dig, build, march, and fight as one coordinated system. To understand how these men could transform open ground into a fortress, we must return to 58 BC. In 58 BC, Julius Caesar arrived in northern Italy with political influence, heavy debts, and powerful rivals waiting in Rome. He had recently completed his consulship, but public office had not made him secure. What he needed next was a provincial command, a position that offered legal authority, military experience, and distance from his opponents. Gaul would provide all three, though no one yet knew how far the conflict would expand. Caesar received command of Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and later Transalpine Gaul, the Roman-controlled territory beyond the Alps. These provinces placed him beside a broad frontier where Roman merchants, allied communities, migrating peoples, and competing tribal leaders regularly crossed paths. He possessed several legions, but his official task was not yet the conquest of all Gaul. The opportunity for a wider campaign emerged from events beyond Rome's existing border. Gaul was not a single kingdom with one ruler or one army. It was a large region occupied by many communities, including the Belgae in the north, the Aquitani in the southwest, and numerous peoples whom the Romans broadly called Gauls or Celts. They spoke related languages and shared some customs, but they also competed for land, trade, prestige, and influence. Some tribes were Roman allies. Others feared Rome. Many were more concerned with neighboring rivals than with a distant republic across the Alps. This division gave Caesar room to intervene. He could support one community against another, present Roman action as the defense of an ally, and then leave troops or political arrangements behind after the immediate danger had passed. Each local crisis opened another road deeper into the region. The first major crisis involved the Helvetii. Facing pressure and seeking new territory, they planned a mass migration from their homeland near the Alps toward western Gaul. Their chosen routes threatened to pass close to Roman territory or through lands belonging to Rome's allies. Caesar blocked the route through the Roman province, rapidly gathered additional forces, and pursued the migrants through Gaul. The campaign ended with the Helvetii defeated and ordered to return home. Caesar presented this as a defensive action, yet the result carried him beyond the province he had been assigned to protect. Roman soldiers were now operating among independent Gallic communities, and Caesar had shown both allies and rivals that he intended to influence events far beyond the frontier. A second confrontation followed almost immediately. Gallic leaders appealed to Caesar for help against Ariovistus, a Germanic king whose forces had crossed the Rhine and established themselves in eastern Gaul. Caesar demanded that Ariovistus halt further expansion. Negotiations failed, and the Roman legions defeated his army, forcing the survivors back toward the Rhine. By the end of 58 BC, Caesar had overcome two separate threats. But he did not withdraw permanently to the Roman province. One intervention created the conditions for another. Alliances required protection, defeated rivals left political gaps, and every Roman advance produced new fears among neighboring tribes. The conquest of Gaul had not begun with a single declared plan. It grew step by step as Caesar transformed regional disputes into reasons for continued military action. To understand why these campaigns kept moving forward, we must now look inside the institution that made them possible. The Roman legion itself, Caesar's adaptable and disciplined instrument of war. A Roman legion was more than a crowd of armed men. It was a system designed to remain organized while marching, building, and fighting far from home. In Caesar's army, a legion was normally divided into 10 cohorts. Each cohort contained smaller units called centuries, led by centurions whose authority reached into almost every part of military life. They maintained discipline, assigned duties, directed formations, and stood close enough to the front to react when orders became confused. This layered structure gave the legion unusual flexibility. Caesar could deploy an entire legion as one formation, detach several cohorts to protect a camp, or send a smaller force to hold a bridge or gather supplies. Units could separate and later return to the main army without losing their place in the chain of command. On a battlefield where dust, noise, and difficult terrain could disrupt communication, the centurions helped convert broad instructions into immediate action. Most legionaries were Roman citizens recruited for extended military service. They were expected to learn far more than the use of weapons. Training emphasized long marches, formation drill, physical endurance, and rapid responses to signals. Soldiers practiced throwing the pilum, controlling the large shield, and fighting at close range. They also learned to carry equipment, prepare food, dig defensive works, and follow orders even when exhausted. Discipline was demanding because the army's survival depended on coordination. A man who abandoned his position could expose those beside him. A unit that moved too early could open a gap in the line. Roman training therefore sought to make thousands of individuals behave as parts of one structure. Courage mattered, but courage without order could become chaos. The legionary's equipment supported this method. His scutum, a large curved shield, protected much of the body and overlapped with the shields beside it. His pilum was a heavy throwing spear used before close combat, disrupting the enemy's approach and making shields harder to handle. Once the distance closed, he relied on the gladius, a short sword suited to compact formations. During Caesar's campaigns, many legionaries wore chainmail, along with helmets and additional protection suited to their role and resources. No single item guaranteed success. The real advantage came from combination. Missiles weakened an advancing formation, shields preserved the Roman line, and short swords became effective once the legionaries had maintained their position and reduced the space between the two sides. Yet the legion's most important routine often began after the day's march. Roman armies did not simply stop wherever night arrived. They selected ground, marked out a camp, dug a ditch, raised an earth rampart, and established controlled entrances. Tents and units were placed according to an organized plan. Guards were assigned, supplies were protected, and soldiers knew where to assemble if an alarm sounded. This repeated labor created a defended base almost every evening. It reduced the danger of surprise and allowed the army to rest without becoming completely exposed. The camp was also a portable headquarters, supply center, and symbol of order. Even in unfamiliar country, the legion carried a recognizable military environment with it. The same habits made Roman soldiers effective engineers. They cleared roads, repaired crossings, built ramps, dug trenches, raised towers, and assembled siege equipment. Specialists provided knowledge, but ordinary legionaries supplied the enormous labor force. Caesar could therefore treat terrain not only as an obstacle, but as something his army could alter. In 55 BC, when Caesar wanted to cross the Rhine, rejected dependence on boats and ordered a timber bridge built across the river. The project demonstrated organization as much as technical skill. Materials had to be gathered, piles driven into the riverbed, sections secured against the current, and both banks protected. The crossing showed allies and opponents that a major river did not necessarily mark the limit of Roman movement. At Alesia, this engineering culture reached its most ambitious form. The soldiers constructed miles of trenches, ramparts, towers, barriers, and linked camps. These works were not separate from combat. They shaped where attacks could occur, delayed movement, provided observation points, and allowed reserves to reach threatened sectors. None of this functioned without logistics. A legion needed grain, water, animals, tools, replacement weapons, clothing, and access to roads. Caesar relied on supply columns, local allies, negotiated deliveries, and food gathered from the regions through which he marched. When supplies failed, even a successful army could be forced to change direction. Rewards also mattered. Soldiers expected pay, a share of captured wealth, promotion, and recognition for service. Caesar cultivated their loyalty by addressing their needs, praising courage, rewarding officers, and presenting himself as a commander who shared danger with them. He often addressed his troops as comrades, reinforcing a bond that became increasingly personal. That relationship would later give Caesar an experienced army whose loyalty extended beyond Rome's institutions to its commander personally. The true strength of Caesar's legions did not lie in one weapon or one formation. It lay in their ability to fight, march, build, supply themselves, and adapt as a single integrated system. By 57 BC, Caesar's campaigns had moved beyond the Roman frontier. In northern Gaul, several communities known collectively as the Belgae prepared to resist him. Caesar responded quickly, separating some through negotiation and confronting others before they could coordinate. The most dangerous moment came near the river Sabis, where the Nervii and their allies waited behind wooded ground while the Romans approached and began building a camp. The legionaries had not completed their defenses. Some were digging, others carried equipment, and parts of the baggage train were still arriving. The Nervii suddenly advanced from concealment, crossed the river, and reached the Roman position before Caesar could arrange his army in the usual way. There was little time for a speech or a prepared battle line. Units had to respond where they stood. This was the kind of confusion Roman discipline was meant to survive. Experienced soldiers formed around their standards. Centurions directed nearby men without waiting for every order to pass through the chain of command. Caesar moved along the line, while legions adapted to the terrain and pressure before them. Some sections were forced back, and the camp appeared threatened, but reinforcements and reserves restored the Roman position. The encounter demonstrated both the strength and vulnerability of Caesar's army. Its routines could be interrupted and its columns surprised. Yet its smaller units were trained to reorganize before confusion became collapse. Victory did not come from perfect control, but from the ability to recover when control was almost lost. 2 years later, Caesar used engineering to deliver a different message. In 55 BC, he decided to cross the Rhine. Rather than rely on boats supplied by allies, he ordered his soldiers to construct a timber bridge. Piles were driven into the riverbed and secured against the current, creating a protected route from one bank to the other in a remarkably short period. The bridge had practical value, but its political meaning was equally important. The Rhine could no longer be treated as a barrier guaranteeing safety from Roman movement. Caesar crossed, operated beyond the river, and returned. The project showed how legionary labor and organization could turn geography into an advantage. Caesar's two expeditions to Britain in 55 and 54 BC revealed a more complicated reality. Crossing the channel required ships, weather, cavalry transport, secure landing areas, and a connection with Gaul. Roman discipline remained valuable on land, but it could not command tides or prevent storms. During the first expedition, cavalry transports failed to arrive as planned, limiting Caesar's mobility after the landing. Severe weather damaged ships and disrupted the army's coastal position. The soldiers repaired vessels and strengthened their camp, but the season was advancing and supplies were uncertain. Caesar returned to Gaul without establishing permanent Roman control. The second expedition was larger and better prepared. More ships, troops, and cavalry crossed the channel, and Caesar advanced farther inland. Yet another storm damaged much of the fleet, forcing him to halt operations and protect the ships behind fortifications. His army could repair equipment, build defenses, and overcome resistance, but every movement depended on a vulnerable supply line. Britain therefore displayed the reach of Caesar's ambition without becoming a complete conquest. The expeditions enhanced his reputation and demonstrated the adaptability of his legions, but they also exposed the limits of operations far from secure bases. Engineering could solve many problems. It could not remove distance, weather, uncertainty, or the need for food. Meanwhile, the communities of Gaul were observing. They had seen Caesar divide alliances, move rapidly, build across rivers, and recover from surprise. They also saw that his soldiers needed supplies, reliable routes, and time to construct defenses. After years of being confronted separately, Gallic leaders understood the lesson. If they continued to fight as isolated tribes, Caesar could defeat them one by one. Their best chance of survival was to coordinate their resistance under a single command. In 52 BC, the resistance to Rome changed character. For years, Caesar had benefited from divisions among the peoples of Gaul. Now, a young Arvernian nobleman named Vercingetorix began to build something Caesar had rarely faced: a coordinated revolt under a single command. His rise was not automatic. According to Caesar's own account, Vercingetorix was first expelled from Gergovia by leaders who opposed rebellion. He returned with supporters, seized control, and sent envoys across Gaul. Communities that had once acted separately were asked to contribute troops, cavalry, supplies, and hostages. Authority was enforced firmly because unity could not survive if every tribe followed its own timetable. For the first time, resistance was becoming a shared campaign, rather than a series of disconnected local uprisings across the region against Roman expansion. Vercingetorix understood that defeating the legions in a conventional battle would be difficult. Roman units were disciplined, experienced, and able to rebuild their formations under pressure. Instead of meeting them on terms that favored Caesar, he tried to attack the system that kept them moving. His strategy focused on cavalry, distance, terrain, and food. Gallic horsemen could threaten scouts, supply parties, and isolated columns without committing the entire army. At the same time, Vercingetorix urged communities to remove grain, livestock, and useful supplies from the Romans' path. Settlements that could not be defended were to be abandoned and destroyed. The policy demanded an enormous sacrifice from the people of Gaul. Homes and stores accumulated over generations were given up so that Caesar's soldiers could not use them. The goal was not to win through one dramatic encounter, but to force the Roman army to march through an increasingly empty landscape while its supply lines became longer and less reliable. One important exception was Avaricum. Its inhabitants argued that the town's marshes, river approaches, and strong walls made it defensible. Vercingetorix reluctantly allowed it to remain standing, then positioned his army nearby where he could watch Caesar without risking a full battle. Caesar decided to besiege the town. His soldiers faced shortages while constructing a massive siege terrace, towers, covered approaches, and other works under difficult conditions. The defenders attempted to disrupt the construction, while Vercingetorix's cavalry and nearby forces continued to threaten Roman access to supplies. Eventually, the Roman works reached the defenses. Avaricum fell after a prolonged siege. Caesar later claimed that only a small number of those inside escaped. The most important point is not the precise scale of the losses, but the wider consequence. The town's fall revealed the destructive cost of the conflict and gave Caesar's exhausted army access to food and rest. Strong defenses could still be overcome through persistence and engineering. The defeat did not end Vercingetorix's leadership. He argued that Avaricum had been defended against his advice and that the overall strategy remained sound. Instead of losing authority, he continued organizing the coalition, strengthening camps, training forces, and avoiding unnecessary engagements. The next major test came at Gergovia, the Arvernian stronghold situated on elevated and difficult ground. Caesar approached with an army already facing political uncertainty among some Gallic allies. He captured a smaller position near the main height and attempted to improve his tactical situation, but the terrain favored the defenders. During a Roman operation near the heights, several units advanced farther than Caesar intended. Orders became difficult to hear and interpret. Soldiers reached walls and defended positions, but the attack lost coordination. Vercingetorix moved forces toward the threatened area, and the Romans were forced to withdraw from the slopes. Gergovia was a clear setback for Caesar. It exposed the limits of discipline when terrain, confusion, and momentum pulled units beyond effective control. It also strengthened the belief that Rome could be resisted. More Gallic communities began reconsidering their alliances, and Caesar's position became less secure. Vercingetorix had now shown that he could unite tribes, threaten Roman supplies, and force Caesar to accept risk on unfavorable ground. Yet he still needed to preserve the coalition and protect its political momentum. After further maneuvering and a major cavalry encounter, he withdrew toward Alesia. Caesar followed. The campaign was now moving toward the place where both commanders would place their entire strategy at stake. When Vercingetorix withdrew into Alesia in 52 BC, Caesar faced a position that appeared almost impossible to take by direct assault. The fortified settlement stood on high ground, protected by steep slopes and rivers. Rather than send his legions uphill against prepared defenses, Caesar chose blockade. His objective was to isolate the Gallic army, prevent supplies from entering, and force the defenders to remain behind their walls. Roman soldiers began constructing an inner line of fortifications around the hill. Trenches crossed the accessible ground, earth ramparts connected camps and redoubts, and watchtowers overlooked the approaches. The line faced inward toward Alesia. Behind it, the legionaries could observe movement from the settlement and respond to attempted breakouts. As the ring closed, food inside the town became increasingly limited. Before the blockade was complete, Gallic cavalry escaped through an unfinished section. Vercingetorix sent them across Gaul with orders to gather a relief army. Caesar now knew that time was working against him. If he remained, another force would eventually arrive behind his position. If he withdrew, the rebellion could recover its momentum. He chose to remain. The legionaries built a second line of defenses outside the first, facing away from Alesia. Caesar's army was now protected by two rings, an inner system designed to contain Vercingetorix, and an outer system intended to resist the army coming to rescue him. The Romans had become a besieging force enclosed within their own fortified corridor. The defenses were designed to slow attackers before they reached the main rampart. Caesar describes wide trenches, some filled with water where the ground allowed it, followed by concealed obstacles and rows of sharpened stakes. Small pits were prepared and covered so that advancing troops could not easily identify safe routes. Towers, fortified camps, and smaller strongpoints allowed the Romans to observe the surrounding terrain and move reserves toward threatened sectors. These works did not make the position invulnerable. They gave Caesar time. Every barrier delayed an advance, separated attacking groups, and created opportunities for troops along the walls to reinforce one another. When the Gallic relief army arrived, the hills around Alesia filled with camps and movement. The first attacks tested the outer Roman defenses while Vercingetorix prepared his forces inside the settlement. The Romans could see signals passing between the two Gallic armies. An assault from one side could force Caesar to move reserves away from the other. The fighting intensified during attacks launched from both directions. Forces inside Alesia attempted to cross the trenches and reach the inner rampart as the relief army pressed the outer line. Roman units fought from prepared positions, but the length of the fortifications meant that Caesar could not make every sector equally strong. Commanders had to identify where pressure was greatest and move cohorts before a local problem became a general collapse. A night attack brought the Gauls close to parts of the defenses, but the obstacles disrupted their advance and Roman reinforcements reached the threatened points. Another attempt followed against ground that appeared weaker because a hill prevented the outer works from completely enclosing the slope. A large Gallic force moved toward this vulnerable sector while attacks elsewhere kept the Romans occupied. The defenders there came under severe pressure. Caesar sent additional cohorts, then ordered Labienus to support the position and prepare a counterattack if the line could no longer be held. At the same time, Caesar moved visibly toward the crisis. His distinctive cloak allowed soldiers to recognize him as reserves advanced with him. From inside Alesia, Vercingetorix also launched another effort against the Roman works, forcing the legions to continue fighting in both directions. The decisive moment came when Roman cavalry moved beyond the fortifications and attacked the Gallic relief force from the rear. Faced with pressure from the ramparts and cavalry behind them, the attackers lost coordination and began withdrawing. The effort from inside Alesia also failed, and Vercingetorix's troops returned to the settlement. The following day, Vercingetorix accepted that relief was no longer possible. He surrendered, and the defenders laid down their weapons. Caesar distributed many captives among his soldiers, while reserving some communities for political negotiations. For Caesar, Alesia became proof that engineering, discipline, and rapid command decisions could compensate for numerical uncertainty and transform an exposed army into a position of remarkable strategic strength. Alesia did not instantly end every act of resistance. Roman campaigns continued during the following year before control over Gaul became secure. Caesar's legions emerged experienced, rewarded, and increasingly loyal to their commander. But the victory had another side. Roman success brought widespread destruction, captivity, displacement, and the loss of political independence for the peoples who had resisted. The legions had demonstrated extraordinary organization and endurance, yet those abilities served a conquest whose human cost extended far beyond the battlefield.